One of the reasons Game of Thrones worked so well in terms of the politics it showed is because George R. R. Martin allowed the decisions of the political movers and shakers to trickle down into the rest of his plot, so that even if Queen Cersei makes a decision in King's Landing, it travels all the way through and affects the Night Watch on the wall, and even the peasants that we see in the inn at the crossroads. George R. R. Martin really allowed himself to delve into why politics matters and how it affects everyone, from the greatest to the least. And because he approached politics in this way, it feels real to the reader. It feels impactful, as opposed to losing the reader in the process of politicking. And that is what I want to talk about today. How you can world build politics and plot in such a way that it dribbles through into the various stratum of your society, and how it affects people in your world, and how you can make that feel real to the reader. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds. First up, what actually is an aristocratic government? Which is the topic of today's video. An aristocratic government is pretty much what it says on the box, a system where the ruling class inherit their social positions. Power is passed down through family lines, creating a deeply entrenched social hierarchy. You don't have to look far in either history or fantasy to find a myriad of examples of this kind of government, and it lends itself to some really interesting power dynamics. It is especially supportive of cat's paw political plots where you have a figurehead as the king who is perhaps incompetent or young or easily manipulatable, and you have a secondary figure who is the controlling figure behind the kingdom, the person who's actually in charge. One of these plots we're going to examine in detail is really central to cat's paw politics, so stay tuned for that. But before we plunge into our actual examples and the plots that go with them, I want to talk about driving the plots down through the stratum of society. And to do that, we need to define 4 types of characters and why they're important to showing the politics of your world. The first type of character is obviously the aristocratic noble, the ruling class. This is the person who's inherited the position, the king, the duke, the baron, etc. It also includes all their direct enforcers, the army, the town guard, the people who ensure that the government remains in place. For this type of character, politics has a very direct impact on their lives. The nobles live it, they breathe it, they eat it. The people under them march to the tune of politics. Soldiers go to war because of politics. Town guards might ignore a certain gang's activities because of politics. If you have a character of this type, they should be very aware of politics. The next type of character is your religious type of character. Depending on how your religion is structured, they might be equally involved with politics, although mostly with their own brand of politics, which we'll examine in a future video. Historically, politics and religion has absolutely been in bed together, and we will see in the examples we look at, when we look at both the kingdom of Silla in ancient Korea, and when we look at the Merovingians of the early Frankish kingdoms, how religion and politics go together often. So if you have a religious type of character that isn't part of the hierarchy of nobles, they should have their own politics, but they should be dramatically impacted by the politics of your nobility. Sometimes they should be adversarial towards the nobles, and sometimes they should act in a supportive manner. The third type of your character is your trader type people, your craftspeople, your economic class, merchants, cobblers, smiths, etc. These people are not noble and they are not the clergy. Their power is wielded through the power of money. They can support the noble class or the religious class with their monetary input, and in return, they get influence over politics. For these characters, politics can go terribly wrong because they don't have direct control. And you can see that very clearly with the Iron Bank and its activities in the Seven Kingdoms. The bank is trying to recoup its loans, but it has no direct means of forcing the policies of the kingdom to change. The only leverage it has is refusing future loans, and that is sometimes not enough, especially when the nobles control the army. The Templars learned this the hard way when King Philip had them declared heretics rather than honouring his loan repayments. And for more on my thoughts around the formation of banks, check out the video I did on that topic. Okay, so our fourth type of character, last and indeed sometimes least, is the peasant class or the labourer class in the city. People who work with their hands, people who do the heavy lifting, people who do the farm work. The majority of society, in fact. They are very affected by politics and they have very little influence over politics. For them, politics is this fire hose of effects that sprays them in the face the whole time. They get recruited into the army, they get press-ganged into the navy, their lands get trampled by armies, their produce gets taken in taxes, and so on and so forth. These people are dramatically affected by politics, and yet they have almost no influence on them. Having characters of this type is a great way to show the final effects of politics on society. And one of the most common mistakes writers make is that pretending that these characters are not affected by politics. These characters are your key to making politics feel very real. Make politics affect the common people, and you can show the reality of noble power plays and what impact they have on the kingdom. So now we know what our types of government are, and we know what types of characters exist in this form of government. So let's turn our attention to some specific examples of kingdoms and plots. Before we do that, if you found value in this episode so far, hit that thumbs up button, show this video a little love, and then let's turn our attention to the kingdom of Silla in ancient Korea. Let's start with a little historical context about the kingdom of Silla. This was one of 3 kingdoms in ancient Korea, and it existed from 570 BCE till 935 CE. It was in the southeastern region of the Korean peninsula, and its capital was Seurabiol. Silla was a fully fledged kingdom by the time of Beopheong of Silla, 514 to 540. And Buddhism was the state religion. Note again the conjoint nature of religion and state. Okay, so that is what the kingdom of Silla was. Now, the specific instance of political activity that we're going to look at is the compelling tale of King Chun Hung, the 24th monarch. Under his reign, Silla experienced a cultural and military renaissance and grew into a powerful kingdom. But King Chunhung didn't just settle for a normal, strong military. He didn't just build up his forces. He created an elite set of warriors called the Harong. They were educated in the martial arts, literature, and of course, Buddhism. The Harong served as great ambassadors for Chunhung to send to the Chinese court, which was at that time under the reign of the Tang dynasty. And the Harong managed to work and establish an alliance between Silla and the powerful Chinese Empire, which was pivotal in unifying the Korean peninsula under King Chong. Now, of course, it is so far in the past that we cannot say for certain whether King Chunhung wanted to create this order of young men specifically in order to secure the Tang alliance. But if I were to use this as the basis for a plot, that is how I would approach it. The king inherits a kingdom that is perhaps in a weakened state. It does not have the military forces required to really stamp down its authority over the length of the Korean peninsula. So the king comes up with a plan to seal an alliance with the larger Chinese empire to use their threat as a unifying factor. But how does he convince them that Silla is a worthy ally, especially since he doesn't actually have those armies? Well, he fakes it. He creates this elite sect of warriors that can go to the Chinese court and impress the Chinese emperor with how skilled they are and how educated they are, and how loyal and pious they are to their leader. Thus, the king secures the alliance that Silla desperately needs in order to unify the Korean peninsula under his authority. Now, why do I say that this kind of plot is a particularly good aristocratic plot? It is because creating a group of elite warriors who are loyal and beholden to the monarch is an extremely aristocratic government action to take. This kind of action leans heavily into the monarchy's need to build on tradition. Remember, nobles need to constantly convince everybody around them that they are literally born better. Even though really nobles are standard humans that put on their pants the same way, they have to constantly flex their authority. So they lean heavily into tradition and pomp. A group of warriors bound in religion and loyalty to the monarch, with pomp and ceremony to boot, and an honor code is perfect. And if you want my thoughts on creating an honor code, check out the video attached. Okay, so now we know the plot of creating this group called the Harong. Let's think back to our character types and how this plot would affect them. The peasants and laborers would potentially be conscripted into the military during this era. Peasants who perform really well might be recruited into the Harong themselves, and this would give them a certain amount of social mobility. And of course, the ideals of the Harong, their code of honor, emphasizing loyalty and filial piety, could also have trickled down into the peasant class, strengthening the cultural fabric. Thus, the Harong could influence societal values and norms. The craftspeople and traders and scholars probably benefited enormously from the Renaissance brought about by King Chunhung. After all, someone had to teach the Harong cadets about the arts and sciences and literature and the like. And all of these young men needed fancy clothing and other wealth flexes and so on. Therefore, the trader class probably supported the king monetarily in creating the Harong. From the religious perspective, given the Harang grounding in Buddhist teachings, Buddhism flourished during this period. And of course, the Harang cadets would have to go and learn from the Buddhist monks. There was clearly a very deep symbiotic relationship between the Harang's formation and the religious class. And I think as such, King Chunhung would have had the full support of the Buddhist hierarchy. This being said, I can see a potential plot-based conflict between perhaps an actual militant order, like an order of militant monks, and the Harang's formation being one where some of the clergy might want the Harang to officially fall into the church's dominance, into the hierarchy of the Buddhist monks, rather than being part of the secular government. So it is worth thinking about that conflict that can exist between the religion and the nobility. And of course, lastly, among the ruling class and their enforcers, King Chunhung's approach to governance and military would have completely changed the world that they live in. And indeed, there might be people who would deeply resent the Harang's creation. They might work against the king and send ambassadors to China to tell the Tang emperor it's all just a lie. It's a show of force without any substance behind it. So also think about how these people's lives are being changed. Even if a political ploy is one that is good for the country, it probably negatively affects someone's life. And as such, there might very well be nobles who will work against the king's actions. Okay, so that's our first political play, creating an elite warrior caste. If you enjoyed that dive into history, hit the thumbs up button and let's talk about that cat's paw plot. For this section, we're going to turn our gaze to the Frankish kingdoms ruled by the Merovingians. Now, we are not talking early Merovingians, back when the kings were vigorous and active and there was a lot of family politics going on. This period is a fascinating part of history, and I would highly recommend that you go check out various videos on the Merovingians' early dynasty. They were a ruthless bunch of men and women alike. They unalived each other with absolute glee. But that period, the rise of the Merovingians, is really a video all by itself. In this video, I want to talk about the later period after the rise of the palace mayors. The Merovingian kings were eventually forced by their nobles to put in place these palace mayors, who started out as a kind of major domo for the palace. But they ended up as effective rulers of the Merovingian kingdoms, with the kings as bare figureheads. And the palace mayor I want to focus on is Charles Martel, which means Charles the Hammer. He was born around 688 AD. He was the illegitimate son of Pippin of Herstal, the mayor of the palace of Austrasia. At the time of Pippin's death in 714, the Merovingian kings were pretty much figureheads, and the real power was vested in the mayor of the palace. But Charles did not immediately ascend to his father's position because he was illegitimate. He had to establish himself, and he did so by joining the military. In fact, he is best known for his military skills, particularly the Battle of Tours in 732, where he defeated an invading Muslim army from Spain, which was under Muslim control at the time. This victory gave him enough political capital to ascend to his father's position as mayor of the palace. This by itself is already enough to form the plot of a novel. The illegitimate son who joins the military, works his way up through the ranks, and then faces this climactic battle against the invaders. And by his actions, he amasses the power to actually ascend to his father's position and triumph. This leans heavily into all of the aristocratic government's attributes: tradition, illegitimacy versus legitimacy, and proving yourself through combat, through military actions, which thus allows you some social mobility, if you have sufficient martial skills. However, Charles's life did not stop there, and it is his later life that really interests me. This man really does give off main character vibes. And you can see this from him going from a battle to stop the invading armies of the Moors to being de facto ruler of the Franks. After the Battle of Tours, Charles felt he needed a Merovingian king of his own, and he had Clothar IV anointed as king. But after Clothar's death, Charles just didn't bother to name a new king. He ruled the Franks as Duke and Princeps, and shortly before his own death, he divided up his lands between his sons with no mention of a king in sight. And his son Pippin became the first Carolingian king of the Franks, and his grandson was the famous Charlemagne. So this plot works really well when that simmer of royalty starts to wear thin, and the advisor who previously ruled from the shadows is powerful enough to step into the light. As a political plot, it really plays well with a lot of the aristocratic government themes. It brings up the question of who is really in charge. It also emphasizes that a king isn't in fact born better. You can replace him with somebody else who is more competent or more militarily adept, etc. But how does it affect our character types? Well, the peasants once again get conscripted into the armies. I'm telling you, man, the peasants' lives suck. The craftspeople and traders and scholars, they have it pretty good though, because Charles Martel's reign laid the foundation for the Carolingian Renaissance, which was a revival in the arts, trade, and scholarship. And of course, he brought stability to the Frankish lands, and stability is good for trade. So he was actually quite good for the craftspeople. From the religious side, Charles had a really complex relationship with the Christian church. He did appropriate church lands, and he did redistribute those lands to his nobles, which of course led to massive conflict between him and the church. But he also defended Christian territories from external threats, most notably the invading Muslim army. This, of course, earned him praise, so he had a very give and take relationship with the church. In terms of his own nobles, his rise to power marked a dramatic shift in the nature of kingship and government, and set precedents for the mayor of the palace to wield direct power. Many of the nobles supported him, but some opposed him and tried to put a Merovingian king in charge once more. This, of course, led to war. This kind of conflict, where you have two kings competing for the throne, is very traditional of this type of government as well. It's in fact what we see with War of the Roses and in Game of Thrones. And we will be talking about some of those aspects next. But Charles managed to triumph and eventually, as I say, became king in reality. And if you enjoyed this brief discussion about the rise and fall of the Merovingians, hit the thumbs up button. And let's finally turn our attention to Game of Thrones. And the plot we're going to discuss there is the Tyrell family's movement from one king to another. In the intricate world of A Song of Ice and Fire, House Tyrell's political savvy is a serious standout. Initially, they support Renly Baratheon, who is killed by Melisandre's shadow assassin. Now, you'd think that having supported Renly and him dying, the Tyrells would have to absent themselves from court, or perhaps they'd even lose their positions and their wealth. But no. See, the Tyrells understand wealth and power. They held the loyalty of the nobles beneath them, which was key to consolidating their power and ensuring they couldn't be removed. And they understood how to use their wealth to secure Marjorie Tyrell's betrothal to Joffrey, catapulting themselves into high favor at the court of King's Landing. And why? Because the throne owed the Iron Bank astronomical sums of money, and the Tyrells were rich. This kind of plot, where you have multiple kings vying for the throne and you have nobles switching sides between them, is also a classic part of aristocratic government. In a situation like this, you would absolutely have people who would switch sides easily, using their wealth or their armies or other attributes that they bring to the table to find the king that suits their needs best. Don't think of loyalty and honor and all those pretty things in the code of chivalry as truly set in stone. Remember, these people are politicians, and they are going to go where they get the most benefit. But once again, what we really want from the plot is to understand how it affects every stratum of society. And let's take a look at our character types again. Peasant farmers would have been very much impacted by this plot. The core of the Tyrells' wealth was the fertile Reach region, and they would have taxed their peasants quite heavily in order to fund their shifting allegiances. So the peasants probably weren't all that happy about the shifting allegiance. The craftspeople, traders, and scholars were probably much happier, since the alliance with the Lannisters opened up the potential for new trading opportunities and stabilized the politics, at least temporarily. The religious perspective is particularly interesting in the Tyrell case, because at the time where the Tyrells were playing this intense form of politics, there was also a political power play happening in the Church of the Seven. The Tyrells were devout followers of this faith, and during this time, the High Sparrow was rising through the ranks. The interplay of Tyrells and this shift in the church to a more militant and puritanical form was a fascinating one. And it really illustrated the complex interaction that result when nobles and the religion clash. And I will explore this topic more in detail in a future video, so make sure that you subscribe and ring the bell icon if hearing my thoughts on the rise of the High Sparrow interests you. And then finally, in terms of the ruling class and how they would feel about this kind of shifting alliances, there are two things to consider. First, the effect of the Tyrells on the noblemen below them. The question is, would any of their noblemen turn against them? And indeed, we did see this happen partially with Sam's family, but only after their second switch of allegiance from the Lannisters back to the Targaryens. It is always interesting to explore that concept of double or even triple betrayal, where those below you in turn betray you upward. And of course, there is the effect of the Tyrells' moves on their peers at King's Landing, where some will be willing to welcome them into the fold, and others will be resentful that the Tyrells have been allowed back into the fold so easily, and that they have so much honor now, and they will actually work against them. Now, if you look at how George R. Martin approached politics, it is absolutely clear that he did consider the impact of the nobles' actions on the various strata of society. He considered the church's actions and their politics on the strata of society. And he made that impact felt. And that is why Game of Thrones worked so well. The reader is constantly engaged during heavy political scenes because we are wondering what is the fallout going to be of these decisions on our favorite characters. So, learn from the master. Break up your society into stratums and really delve into the impact of politics on the lives of the characters in these stratums. This applies to any form of government, whether it is aristocratic or democratic or theocratic or anything else. You always need to think of how politics affect the strata of your society. But the type of society will have different kinds of strata and different levels of impact and influence. And in the next video, we'll discuss theocratic governments and their plots and societal effects. So remember to subscribe for that. And those are my thoughts on political plots in aristocratic form of government and how they affect the strata of that type of society. I myself write politics in my epic fantasy saga, Sangwell Chronicles, so if you're interested in checking out how I write politics and in supporting the channel, you can find those on the links down below. But please don't feel pressured to make a financial contribution. You can also help the channel just by watching another video. If you enjoyed this video, you'll probably enjoy how to create a monarchy. Or you could trust the algorithm's recommendation right over there. All hail our mighty overlords. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time Worlds, where we build what we need when we need it.